Okay, so we're up in the Gemara on Zion Amud Beis. Okay, we're up to the Mishnah continue to say um, the various different machloikesin. Most of the time, we find in the Talmud, most of the time, Beis Hillel are the lenient ones, and Beis Shammai are the ones that are more stringent. In most laws in the Talmud, we always find Beis Shammai being the stricter ones and Beis Hillel being the lenient ones. But our Mishnah began with a leniency of Beis Shammai, um, which was um, of the egg that was laid on Yom Tov. Beis Shammai allows you to eat it, and Beis Hillel does not. And because the Mishnah brought down already one law in which Beis Hillel was more strict than Beis Shammai, he brings you other cases as well. That's how this follows this case in the Mishnah. So we say that Beis Shammai Eimrim So'er V'Kizayis, just to refresh our memory, this is talking about a law of Pesach. Now, there is two types of chametz. There is a bread that has become leavened. Leavened bread means it became sour, leavened, and then you have sourdough. Sourdough meaning that it's become very sour. The dough has become very sour, so you use that dough to make other things sour. So you have regular bread and you have sourdough. Sourdough is called sa'ir. Sa'ir is sourdough. So in our Mishnah, it says that Beis Shammai say that sa'ir, the sourdough, it is a kizayis. Now, also, just to take a note that there are two prohibitions on Pesach. One is against possessing chametz. Another one is against eating chametz. So, as we'll see, the Gemara will explain, it's not clear in the beginning, but the Gemara will explain that the discussion over here is about the possession of the chametz, which means whether you're eating sourdough, or you're eating chametz, regular leavened bread, eating them, the amount that you eat to violate the prohibition to get lashes would be a kizayis. But as far as not possessing chametz, Beis Shammai is lenient, and he says like this: if you have in your possession sa'ir, that's the sourdough, because it is a very strong chametz, because it's sour, it's really a very strong. So then, even the amount of a kazayis, the amount of an olive, is enough to give you the prohibition. And the chametz, according to Beis Shammai, you are not going to be violating the possession, the prohibition of possessing chametz until you have a kosevis. Kosevis is a date. A date is larger than the olive. A date is larger than an olive, and therefore it means that it's less of a. It's easy. It's not. It's harder to violate chametz than it is with se'ir, because by chametz you're not going to violate the law unless you possess a piece large enough as the size of a date, not the size of an olive. That's the view of Beis Shammai. According to Beis Hillel, there is no difference. whether it's sourdough or it's regular leavened bread, it's all going to be by a kizayis. That means that Beis Hillel is more stringent than Beis Shammai, because according to Beis Shammai, you're not going to be violating chametz unless you have a kisevis, the size of a date. According to Beis Hillel, you'll violate it even if you only have a kizayis. So let's look now in the Gemara. So the Gemara wants to know my taimayu de Beis Shammai. What is Beis Shammai's reasoning that he makes a distinction between the sourdough and the bread? Now, generally speaking, when we say that there's a prohibition against eating, it's usually a kizayis. That's the usual shear. When the Torah, what is called achila, when the Torah prohibits to eat something, the size is the size of an olive. So here, Beis Shammai makes a distinction between sourdough and between regular chametz. Now, right now, the Gemara doesn't know yet of the distinction that I have told you, that we are really discussing here, not the eating, we're just talking about the possessing. But in the Gemara, it doesn't know. The Gemara originally thinks that it's across the board, whether it's possessing or it's eating. The Gemara thinks that if we're talking about sa'ir, which is the sourdough, then a kezayis is sufficient to violate the prohibition as it pertains to sa'ir. But as far as chametz, over there you need a kukiseves. Frank the Gemara asks, my taimayu the Beis Shammai, what is the reasoning of Beis Shammai? Why do they make this distinction between sa'ir and regular chametz? And the Gemara says, im kain, in that case, which means if Beis Hillel is correct that there's just one shear of a kizayis for both of them, the chad shiura litarvayu, if they have the same shear, chametz and sa'ir have the same shear, im kain the chad shiura litarvayu, lichtev rachmona chametz v'loy bo yisrael. So Beis Shammai's argument would be, why does the Torah B'chlal have to mention both? It talks about chametz and it talks about sa'ir. Why mention both? The fact is, if the Torah says you can't have chametz, that automatically includes sourdough, because chametz has not yet become so much sour, has not become. Sourdough is a stronger chametz. So if we are prohibited to possess or to eat, in this start of the Gemara, we're prohibited to eat or possess sourdough. I mean, chametz, for sure we can't eat or possess a sourdough, because that's even a stronger chametz. So why does the Torah have to specify don't eat chametz and don't eat also sa'ir, or tell you the prohibition of not possessing by sa'ir? Why? Why mention it separately? So the Gemara says, lichtev rachmana chametz. Torah should have just told us there's a prohibition about chametz. The loy bo yisrael, we don't need to tell you a prohibition by sourdough. Va'ano amino, I would say on my own, I don't need a pasuk. Uma chametz she'ein chimutzei kosher b'kizayis, since even chametz, who is not a hard sour, not a hard chametz, it's not sourdough, it's just a little bit chametz. The Torah tells you that you can't have a kizayis, because every time when you can't eat something, the size is a kizayis. So shechimutzei kosher, so sourdough, has a very strong chametz, it's sourdough, meaning it sat for a long time. That's how it became sour. Lekolshkin, for sure, it's going to be also with a kizayis. if we just went along with the simple meaning that the Isur is a Kizais. As we usually know, the Isur is usually a Kizais. So the question we have, Sa'ir the Kosav Rahman Alamali. So why did the Torah have to say, also mention about sourdough? Sourdough we can learn as a foratory from chametz. Why does the Torah have to write Sa'ir? And therefore, Beit Shammai conclude that loimer loch shiurei shel zeh, loy ki shiurei shel zeh. The amount of chametz and Sa'ir are not the same. That's why we have to write them separately. If you would have just learned Sa'ir from chametz, the Torah would have just said chametz. Then, and you would say, well, if chametz is prohibited, Sa'ir is prohibited for sure. Yeah, but how much of Sa'ir would be prohibited? Only a kizais, because we learn it from chametz. The reason the Torah writes it separate to tell you, no, that there's two separate shir. The shir of chametz is one shir, and that's why the Torah mentions it separately. And the shir from Sa'ir is another shir. Let's do the Rashi. How do we get to Keseves? We'll see in the Rashi. Shi'uri shel zechulu. What is the explanation? For this reason, he does not learn Sa'ir from Chometz, and he writes it beferish. He specifies Sa'ir separately. Why? Because Mishum de Chometz Bekikoiseves. Because Chometz has another shear. If you would learn Sa'ir from Chometz, then it would be if you would learn out, then everything would be also, Sa'ir would also be a Kiseves. Why? Because if we learned Sa'ir from Chometz, we would say, listen, Chometz is a Kiseves and Sa'ir is a Kiseves. The loy tema daye lebo min adin liyas kinodin. Because if you learn Sa'ir as a foratory from Chometz, then you would say, since Chometz is a Kikaiseves, Sa'ir is also Kikaiseves, because you can't learn Sa'ir from Chometz and make it more stringent and say that it's a Kizais, because of the rule of Dayi Lebomin Hadin Lius Kinodin. If you learn something from a foratory, you can't make it stronger than what you learn it from. So if the Isser of Chometz is B'Keseves, and Sa'ir would have been learned from the Isser of Chometz, then Sa'ir would also be Asr B'Keseves. U'Sa'ir Nami B'Keseves. La'achi Kasvei Behedye L'Shi'ure B'Shi'ira Zuta B'Shi'ura Rabba. That's why the Torah writes it B'Feirish, Sa'ir, to tell you that there's two separate shiurim. Don't learn Sa'ir from Chametz. Sa'ir has its own shir. Shur is Ushurabba. So, where do we get the shir of a Kukusevis? Where does that come from? So Rashi says, Lohachi Nokat Kusevis, therefore he uses Kusevis, either the Bahachi Havi Yasuve Daitik in the Mfarish time of Yuma. Either Rashi says because that's the amount which settles a person down. Eating the size of a date is considered. That's why on Yom Kippur, because the Farish time of Yoma, the Gemara says by Yom Kippur, the amount to prohibition of eating on Yom Kippur is the size of a kaisevis. So that's why that would be the Isser of Chometz. Or Nami Shurin Allah Lamosh Sinai. Another reason is because all measures come by tradition from Moshe given to Sinai. So we know that Chometz is Bika Koseves. But the bottom line is, since Chometz is a Bika Koseves, if we learned Se'or from Chometz, Se'or would have been a Koseves too, because of the Eilebom and Adin Liskinodin. So the Torah writes it separately to tell you there's two separate shiurim. There's one shiur for Chometz, which is a Koseves, and there's a larger shiur for Sa'ir, which is enough with the Kizais. Beis Hillel, and Beis Hillel says no. Tzrichi. We need them both, and we can't learn one from the other, because on one hand, the Ikos or Rachmana Sa'ir, he starts with the other end. If the Torah would have just said sourdough, that it's prohibited, maybe the reason we're not allowed to have chametz on Pesach is because it's a very strong chametz. Aval chametz the ein chimutzi kosher, but chametz who is not a hard chametz, emaloi. I would say no. Maybe you don't need to. Maybe you don't need. You can possess chametz. You can possess chametz. So you need tzricha. So we need sa'ir and chametz, because sa'ir itself was not a proof. Because of Rahman chametz, if the Torah the other would just said chametz, so you would say chametz is prohibited from the roy lachila. Avol sa'ir she'ein roy lachila, but the sa'ir which is not fit for eating, emaloi. Then I would say that you don't have to. You can possess it. Yes, it's a stronger chametz, but it's not an edible chametz. So therefore, maybe there's no prohibition. Tzricha. In the bottom line, it seems, I mean, again, Rashi doesn't say so beferish, but the bottom line, it seems that according to Beis Hillel, the tradition was that they both have a kizayis, but we need to say both, because if we wouldn't say both, we might have think that the other one is not usur altogether. Either we would think that only sa'ir is usur because it's a strong chametz, and therefore regular chametz would not be usur altogether, or we would think only chametz is usur because it's edible, but sa'ir, which is not edible, is not prohibited, so we needed both. But what is the shear? Rashi, we have to say that according to Beis Hillel, the shear is both of them a kizayis. According to Beis Hillel, whether it's oir, whether it is chametz, in both cases it'll be a kizayis. Okay. Frag the Gemara. So it almost seems like, according to Beis Shammai, soir is only a kisebes, and chametz is only a kizayis. But the Gemara says, "Who Beis Shammai leslu the Reb Zayda," they don't go by what the Reb Zayda said. Now, Reb Zayda is a moira, but Reb Zayda quotes a pasuk, so don't they hold that Reb Zayda is correct? Rashi explains, leslu the Reb Zayda bitmia. If there's a beferish pasuk, why would he not? How could he disagree? What does Reb Zayda say? The Omar Reb Zayda says it's a little bit strange. The verse seems to talk about two things at the same time. Pasach hakosuv b'se'or. The Torah starts with talking about sourdough. What is the pasuk? Pasach hakosuv b'se'or. The Torah says, "Se'or for 7 days. Se'or lo yimotze b'vatechem." There shall be no sourdough in your house. So we're talking about soil. Don't have sourdough in your house. But then the pasuk says, ki kol oichel machmetzes, anybody who eats chametz. It should say ki kol oichel so'er, not ki kol oichel machmetzes. He starts off with so'er and then v'sayim chametz. The Torah says because you should not have so'er in your home because of anybody who will eat chametz. Why are we saying that? He should have said anybody who eats so'er. Because the punishment of telling you if you eat, you will be cut away, it follows the warning that it should not be in your home, meaning they shouldn't be in your home, don't eat it, because anybody who eats it, why are we saying anybody who eats machmetzes? So he says to tell you, Zehu sa'ir v'zehu chametz. Zehu sa'ir kozek zet. That is this. So basically to tell you that there is no difference because the Torah sort of intertwines the sa'ir with the chametz. How could Beis Shammai say that there is a different shear for chametz and a different shear for sa'ir? And the Gemara answers that le'inyan achila kula alma lepligi. What I told you before, Reb Zayda is talking about eating. Eating is actually has the same shear. But the Bachloikis, when Beis Shammai says that there's a different shear, he's talking about the possession of the chametz. Look inside. Le'inyan achila kula alma lepligi. As far as eating chametz, there is no disagreement. Everybody agrees that you eat a kezayis, kikol eichel, machmetzes is the same shear as soir. It's always a kezayis. The machloikis is with regards to possession. Let's look at Rashi. Le'inyan achila kula alma lepligi. So Rashi, ba'afilu Beis Shammai moidi. Even Beis Shammai will agree. The chametz chayiv b'ksezayis kisoir b'achilosai. That chametz is the same thing as soir by eating it. Eating it has the same shear. So for eating it doesn't make a difference. Look at Reb Zayda, like Reb Zayda says. Avol lebiur, but to remove from your home, not to possess it, lebeis Shammai loy hishvu. Beis Shammai does not compare eating sourdough to removing sourdough. It's not the same. Possessing, you're not allowed to possess a kizayis, but for chametz is a deal. The bill of Beis Shammai lo hishvu. Since the Torah writes both, lo yirah l'cha chametz v'lo yirah l'cha soir. So there's a special pasuk for chametz and for soir not to be seen, so you're not to possess, that you have to move. So therefore, soir lo yal finon. We don't learn for soir that it's enough of we don't learn so'er from eating. Lemeimer, which means to say, just as far as it comes to eating, they're both by akizayis. To say, so to say, well, if it's the same by eating that it's all akizayis, so therefore let us also say that possessing it should also be all by akizayis, because the Torah equated. We don't say that. Because since the Torah writes both lo yirah and lo chametz and soir, we must say it's a different shear. So even though by eating we say that soir and chametz is the same, so Beis Shammai is saying, even though that with regards to eating, soir and chametz are the same, but with regards to possession, Sa'ir is a kazayis and chametz is b'kekesevos. The Gemara says, Kipligi le'inyan biur. They are arguing as far as removal, biur chametz, to get rid of the chametz. Beisamai savri lo yalfinan biur mechila. Beisama, we don't learn biur from eating. Eating eating chametz is a kizayis, but burning chametz or removing the chametz is a kiseves. We do learn bir machila because just like eating is prohibited kizayis, removal is also requires a kizayis.
Do we hold?
Yeah.
Don't we hold that? I mean, not for the Gemara, but halacha that any amount you can't have. I mean, we go searching for crumbs.
Possessing, yeah. But the prohibition of bal yiro, bal yimotze would be if it's a kizayis, which means you don't want to come to eat it, and you might find it a good piece. But the strictly from the Torah, you would need a kizayis to violate the lav of lo yiro. Okay. We also learned so in a Beitzah, the bebiru the pligi v'loy b'achila, that the machloikis of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is only as far as removing it from the home, but by eating, everybody agrees it's a kizayis. Quoting the Beitzah now, it says v'lo yirah chametz v'lo yirah soir zehu machloikis shebein Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. So this is a machloikis between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai omrim, with regard to seeing it. Machloikis Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai omrim so'er b'kizayis v'chometz b'kiseves. That so'er is a kizayis and chometz. You need a kiseves in order to violate lo yirah. Beis Hillel omrim zev b'kizayis, both b'kizayis. But as far as eating, there is no machloikis. Everybody agrees that it is a kizayis. Okay, let's do the next part of the Mishnah. Talked about shechting a chaya and an oif on yontif. Now, we know that if you shecht a bird or an undomesticated animal, a chaya, you need to cover the blood. When you shecht it, the blood that comes out of the shechita, you got to cover it in sand, ba'ofa. So the Mishnah is talking about that hashoichet chayev v'oiv b'yomtiv v'chulu. So let me just see. Just like just to refresh our memory. So we have it over here. So the Mishnah said, this is Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai said, "Hashoichet chayiv yoyv yom tov." So what does it mean, hashoichet? The cases that we're giving in, one who shechts a chay and oif on yom tov, what should he do? So the Gemara says the lashon of hashoichet means if you already shechted. It seems like the shoichet means one who shechted, meaning that is after the fact, he did it. So basically, the question is going to be, if you shechted, can you cover it? Or can you not cover it? We're not talking what you should do in the beginning, but it seems like we're talking about after the fact. Again, since we're saying hashoichet means one who shechted. In other words, you're talking about a fact. A person shechted. The Ovid ein lechatchila loy. Seems like the Mishnah is talking about he did it. And now you're stuck. What do we tell this guy who shechted? He wants to go ahead and cover the blood of the bird or the chaya with sand. The question is, what do we tell him? But the question is only after the fact. The evidain in, yeah, but lechatchila no. In other words, there's not even a question that we don't recommend for the person to go shechting. It doesn't say. Otherwise, the Mishnah should have said shoichet chaya be'oif or beishamai. Okay, but hashoichet the eved. Zokt Rashi. The ish shochat mashma. If he shechted, that's what it appears. Abel lechatchila lo yishori le beishamai lishchot. Lechatchila, he would not allow him to shech. Elaim ken yesh lo offer muchan tituach. The best way, the normalest way to be able to shech the animal on Yontiv and to fulfill the mitzvah of kisui dam offer to cover the blood would be you have ready sand that is ready there. Offer tituach means grounded up, crumbed up sand, and you have it ready and you can cover it with. But the fact that the Mishnah gives the scenario of hashoichet, he already shechted, is mashma that lachatchila Beishama isn't going to let him shecht. Elim ken yesh lo for muchan tituach, unless he has grinded up, crushed up sand, so he can do it. So even Beis Shammai, who says that you can dig with the shovel and cover it up, yachper bedeker v'yichase, is saying, why do you do that? Is because you already shechted it. So what are we going to do? You're going to, therefore, use the shovel and cover it. But lechatchila, he won't allow you to do that. That's what it seems like. Amos Seifa. So let's see what it says in the Seifa. Ubeisila loimrim. Beisila tells lo yishchat. So lo yishchat means that you should not shecht. So he's telling you, he's not talking about what happens after you shecht. Beis Hillel was talking about Beis lo yishchat elim ken hoyel for muchan tituach mebed yom. So he's telling you lechatchila, don't shecht. But he's not talking about after the fact if you shechted. Miklal the Tanakama Sover, so that would mean the first opinion, the Beis Shammai, they hold that yishchet, that you should shech. So Rashi Miklal that yishchet bitmia, v'ashechet kama. But according to Beis Shammai, the case is after the fact. How could we say? How could we say hashoichet means after the fact? That the only reason that Beis Shammai is going to allow you to take the shovel is because you already shechted, but lechatchila won't allow you. But from the fact that the Beis Hillel say don't shecht, so they're talking about lechatchila. That means that according to Beis Shammai, you could go shecht lechatchila. So what's going on over here? And the Gemara says it's not a problem. You're missing interpreting hashoichet over here. It's really all talking about b'di'evet. You're saying Beis Hillel say lo yishchet, that they're only talking about. He says lo yishchet, but he means lo yichase. Don't shecht. We're talking about after the fact. That's where the machlokes b'sham and b'silo. You already shechted it. And Beis Hillel said, okay, Beis Shammai says, okay, you can now go and cover it with the shovel because you already shechted. And Beis Hillel are saying, no, you can't cover it, even though you shechted it already. But even though they're using the Lashon, Lo Yishchait, it means to say, don't cover, because don't shecht and cover. Lo Yishchait the Beis Hillel, Holikashi, Lo Yishchait the Beis Hillel, Akisu L'chude Koyimad. They're just talking about the covering, that's only the covering. What he's saying is, Lo Yikmar Maisa Ashchita Dainai Kisu. He says, don't cover. He disagrees with Beis Shammai, who says that you can cover with the shovel. And Beis Hillel say, no, you cannot. Lo Yishchot v'yichase Kamar. He said, don't shecht and cover. He's talking about the act of shechita, of covering. You can't do that. So even b'di'evet, lo Yishchot v'yichase, aval pisha shachat lo yigmar. So even though you shecht, don't conclude. So what's the machlokes, the way we interpret it now? B'di'evet, you shechted it. Beis Shammai says, since you shechted it, go ahead and cover it with that shovel. That's with a decker. Even though you don't have prepared, you're just going to have to shovel it out. Beis Hillel said no. They said you're not allowed to cover it up. So in that case, the Gemara Amos Sefer. So let's look what the Sefer. In the Sefer of the Mishnah, it says, Umoidim, that Beis Hillel will agree to Beis Shammai. Sheim shochad b'di'eved, if you shechted, sheyachper b'deker v'yichase, that he should dig, just like Beis Shammai, you should dig with the shovel and cover, that there's no difference between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they agree. But that's b'di'eved. Miklal the Reisha lav di'eved. So that means in the Reisha, it's not b'di'eved. That means that he's saying that according to Beis Hillel, is the question is whether you're allowed to lachatchila or not, and Beis Hillel says you're not allowed to lachatchila. So how come the Mishnah says hashoichet, which is mashma b'di'eved, when the machlokes is lachatchila? Because Beis Hillel allows you even lachatchila.
If you don't do that, then the food is not edible.
Well, can say it again? What?
If you don't cover it, then you can't eat the food.
No, you cannot be mevatel the mitzvah, and then you should not eat it, and you have to wait till after you have to. That's what it comes out over here. I think so, pretty sure.
So he's saying that if you shecht it b'di'eved on Yontif, according to Hillel, you can wait till.
You know what? Hold on with this question. We'll see in a minute, because the Gemara is going to change the context over here, and I think we'll see it clearly. Right down. Omar Rabbi says, Rabbi Hochi Komar. This is what it says. Hashoichet doesn't mean b'di'eved, one who shechted. But Hashoichet means one who's coming to consult, Shaboli Molech. Ketzad Omerle, how should we tell him? So it's not talking Hashoichet b'di'eved. Hashoichet means one who's coming to shech, and he wants to ask us what it is. So we're talking about lachatchila. The machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is about lachatchila, not b'di'eved. Hashoichet Shaboli Molech. Normally, when it says Hashoichet, means one who shechted after the fact. But but here it means the beginning, which means he didn't shecht yet. Hashoichet shabolishchit. Behema is coming to shecht the behema. Boli molech lanu, and he's coming to ask us, Ma yaseh, what should he do? Im yishchet im lav, should he shecht or not? Hoyil vein lo offer tituach. He doesn't have regular, like I said, the normal thing would be to have regular crushed up sand, and you can use that. Wouldn't be an issue. But he doesn't have the over tetuach. What should he do? So Beishamai Emrim, Beishamai Emrim loy, Emrim, Beishamai Emrim, Omer loy, he tells him, Shchoit, Chafoir, V'kasei, go ahead, Shecht, dig and cover. You're okay, you're good. You dig with the shovel, you're good. Beisil Emrim, and Beisil will say, loy Yishchoit, they will tell him, unless you have ready-made sand. But b'diavad, if you did shecht, you can cover it up with the shovel. Rabbi Yosef Amar, Hachik Amar. Seems to say the same thing. The Gemara is going to explain the difference. According to Bishama, there's a difference here. Again, Rabbi Yosef says what? He's coming to consult us and asking, how should I tell him? Bishama Emrim Omerloi Leich Chafer Shchoit V'Kasei, that he tells him, go shecht and cover. Basil will say, don't shecht unless you have sand prepared from daytime. Okay, so seems exactly the same thing. We'll see in the Gemara. What's the difference? Okay, so the machloikis according to this is lechatchila, but we changed the taich of hashoichet. We're saying hashoichet doesn't mean after the fact that you shechted. Hashoichet means you're coming to shecht and you're asking us what to do. So we tell you what Bishama said and what Basil says. So Amar lay Amar le Abai le Rabbi Yosef. So Abai says to Rabbi Yosef, Lema Mar v'Rabba b'Reid Rab Zera, Avarabba Mar v'Rabba. Both of you, because they said the same thing almost, so we don't know the difference. But you, master, which is Rabbi Yosef and Rabba, b'Rab Zera Omar Rav Koma Falagitu. You're arguing about what Rab Zera said in the name of Rav. That's your machlokes. What does this say? The Omar Rab Zera Omar Rav. Rab Zera said the name of Rav. Hashoichet tzorich she'itin offer lamata v'offer lamayla. Rab Zera says one who shechts needs to put down sand on the bottom. He pours the blood, and then you put blood on the top. How does he know that? Because the verse says, "V'shofach es domei," you pour the blood with the shechting, v'chisohu be'offer, and then you cover it with the sand. It doesn't say chisohu offer. You cover it with sand. You cover it in the sand. Be'offer mashma shu nivlo v'tomun be'offer koydem akisu. It's mashma that he is mixed in and is hidden in the sand even before you cover it already. It's already in the offer. Shofach dam v'chisohu be'offer. It's in the offer already. Offer loy nemar v'chisohu offer have the mashma loy kabed al kisi. If it said chisohu offer, would just be the covering. Ela ba'offer melamed sha'ashoichet tzorich she'it offer lamato ba'offer lamaylo. He has to give the sand both on the bottom and also on the top. So what is the machlokes? The mar islay the Rab Zera. You hold of Rab Zera, which means, Dr. Rashi, Ubeinon offer lamato, meaning you require that there should be sand on the bottom. V'hochi kamar. V'hochi kamar Rabba. And what Rabbi is saying, Im yichoylin loymar lo shchoit miyad, if you can tell him, shecht immediately, sheyesh lekfar offer lamato, sharin alay, there's already there, then we allow him to. Avol im einay tzrichim, anu tzrichim loymar loy, chafer tchilo, if we have to tell him, no, go dig first, loy natir loy, then we're not going to allow him. So in other words, even so even so he's explaining Basil. We're going to tell him la yishchot unless there's already in the bottom. The Rabbi Leslie the Rabbi Zeda. And the Rabbi who says
But isn't the question b'diavad? So he already checked it, whether he had the sand there or not.
I see in Rabbi Yosef and the Rabbi the exact same words. It changes along the Lashon Ah. See, over here it says first shchoit, chafoir v'kasei. That's in the word of Rabbi. In the words of Rabbi Yosef, he tells him chafoir shchoit v'kasei. So that's why, according to Rabbi Yosef, that's what he's saying over there. The in an offer lemata, when Beis Shammai says, "Yeah, go ahead and shecht," im yecholim loymen lo shchoit miyad. You don't have to tell him dig. You tell him shchoit miyad. That's what he's saying. That's what he's saying. But he says, "V'ochi Rabbi." Oh, so the Rabbi disagrees. So Rabbi Yosef different says, "Im yichem lo shchoit miyad, sheyesh lekvar ofer lamata shanin lei." Avimon tzrichim loymer loy chafoir. He doesn't allow it, which is Rabbi Yosef does allow it. Rabbi Yosef says, "Chafoir shchoit v'kasei." That's okay, even if you don't have yet earth in the bottom. But according to Rabbi Yosef, I don't understand why Rabba Why do we have to say Rabba Leslie the Reb Zera? The Rabba doesn't hold by Reb Zera. But Rabba says, "Im chem lo mishchesh yesh lo kvar ofel lamata sharin lei, aval im onu tzrichim leimer lei chafer tchila." Why Rashi's explaining Reb Zera, and then he's saying, "V'ocha kol Rabba, im yechelim leimer lei shcheit miyad." But we're saying that Rabba Leslie the Reb Zera doesn't have. This Rashi belongs elsewhere. That's why it doesn't really fit over here. V'ocha kol Rabba, im yechelim leimer lei shcheit. This Rashi, that's why I'm having a hard time. This Rashi belongs over here. Originally, the Gemara thinks that the machloikis between why does he say he says shchait, he says shchait. So the Gemara thinks because Rabbi says shchait. Why? Because he doesn't hold that you need any, and there's no sand on the bottom. And why does Rabbi Yosef say chafer shchait? Because he holds you need sand on the bottom. That was the initial thought of the Gemara. So that's what I'm Rabbi Yosef. Lein mav Rabbi Reb Zera Omer Rav Kamaf Likitu. The Omer Reb Zera Omer Rav Hashechet Tzorich Shit Nofel Lamato Ba'ofor Lamailo Shenem Mav Shorich So Ba'ofor Malam Shech So the Mar is like the Reb Zera Ubein Nofel Lamato. Okay, and that's why you need to first dig. The Rabbi less like the Reb Zera. That's why you don't have to dig. Amar Lei answered no. Bein lididi bein lerabo. Island Reb Zera. Both of us, we hold Reb Zera. Ubein Nofel Lamato. We need Nofel Lamato. This is what we're arguing about. Rabba Sobar Iyiko for Lamata Ein Iloi Loi. And only if the sand is over there, we're allowed to. Rabba. Im Yecholin. Im Yecholin Loim Lashchoit Miyad. Sheyesh Lekvar Ofer Lamato. Then Sharinaloi. Then we allow him. Aval Im Onu Tzrichim Loim Lechafer Tchilo. We're not going to lie. Why? Maybe he's going to change. After digging, he's going to change. He's not going to shecht it. That he dug it no reason. I don't care, he says. The loy better that you don't worry about it. You're not going to allow him. He's not going to prevent. He's going to prevent from simchas yom tov. Your question before was if he doesn't cover it, can he not eat it? I don't know very clearly. It seems to me that without covering, you should still be able to eat it. It doesn't render it. You're not mekayim the mitzvah. But the person is going to change his mind, and he's not going to shecht, or you're not going to lam, then he's not going to want to shecht. But I'm assuming if he shechted, the only question is, should he cover or not to do the mitzvah b'diavad of, but it's not a question of eating. That's what I believe. Okay, but we got to check that out. But in any event, we're out of time, and we'll leave it over here. Wish everybody a good gebench year, blessings and all. Yamalim mishalos levavchem l'toiva, all your heart's desires should be fulfilled, and most importantly, should be a year of peace, of shalom for all of Jewish people all over Eretz Yisrael and all over the world. And we should merit Mashiach Tzidkenu. So everybody have a good Yom Tov, fast on Yom Kippur, and a Freilich Sukkos, and we'll see everybody after Simchas Torah, Be'ezras Hashem. For joining you. See everybody next year.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Thank you.
Goodbye till next year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.